In hour 14, we switch from one prose source to another, from Herodotus to Philostratus. And I want to repeat, Herodotus is dated to the 5th century BCE. Philostratus is dated to the early 3rd century CE, so there's quite a lot of difference chronologically. And yet the idea of the hero, the idea of the cult hero in particular, is very consistent, as we will see. One thing that you will notice as you go through the texts in hour 14 is all the sentimentality that is lavished on the cult hero by the worshippers of the cult hero. And sometimes this sentimentality becomes almost uncomfortable for us to bear. There's just so much devotion that it verges on near fanaticism. Maybe fanaticism isn't the right word, but you judge for yourself. In any case, text A is a good way to start it, because in this early part of the prose source we're considering, it's very clear that one of the speakers is not yet initiated into the mysteries of hero cult, and he's the Phoenician, he's the foreigner. Whereas the other speaker in the dialogue, who is the person who takes care of the vineyard, or more generally the garden in which the cult hero Protesilaos dwells, that person, we'll call him ampelurgos for short, meaning the vineyard worker. That person is initiated, maybe not fully initiated. As it turns out, he's more like, if I can use an analogy, a Boy Scout versus an Eagle Scout. He doesn't know all the mysteries of the cult hero, but nevertheless, he can really get the uninitiated person inducted into the mysteries of the cult hero, who is Protesilaos, the first Achaean to die in the Trojan War. And right away, there is an emphasis on how much the initiand, by which I mean the person who desires to be initiated, how the initiand desires and yearns for the process of initiation, because he really wants to be in the world of heroes. And this desiring, this longing, this yearning is expressed by way of a word that turns out to have deep significance for those who actually worship heroes. That is to say, Pothos, P-O-T-H-O-S, or its variant, pothe, P-O-T-H-E with a long mark over the E. This word can mean simultaneously sexual desire and desire to worship somebody who is sacred. That seems contradictory to us, but by the time we're finished with these texts, I think you will see that it's not all that difficult to understand. It's not all that difficult to wrap our minds around what's going on here. Then the question is, if it's so important to worship a hero and to know about the hero from the point of view of the myths and rituals that are involved in worshiping this hero, if that's the case, then do we really need Homer? Do we really need Homeric poetry, which we have been working so hard at mastering in the first part of our project as we were reading the Homeric Iliad and Odyssey? Well, there are many playful references to how if you have a take on the ancient Greek hero only from the standpoint of Homeric poetry, how your perspective is really incomplete, that you need to have that further perspective of what the myths and the rituals of hero cult have to add as additional perspective, additional wisdom about the idea of the hero. And in text B, you have a very interesting comparison of what we can learn from Homeric poetry and then what we can learn from the myths and rituals of the actual cult of Protesilaos. In some of these cases where you get to learn something that you don't learn from Homeric poetry, the initiand is actually quoted as saying that he has a longing, a yearning to find out about these extra details. And again, you see this aspect of the cult hero that has to do with the emotions of those who are initiated into the cult hero's worship or who are about to be initiated, as in the case of this Phoenician, this initiand. Already in the Iliad, as we see in text D, there are traces of the idea of hero cult, especially with reference to Protesilaos. And when we do a close reading of the passage that I give you here in text D, you will see that even the word Pothos and its derivatives are in play in this Homeric passage, so that what we are learning in more detail by looking at a prose source from the early part of the 3rd century CE, what we learn there can be retrojected all the way back to the much more ancient system of thinking as represented by Homeric poetry. Already there, the people of Protesilaos are represented as yearning for him once he dies. And that kind of yearning, again, has to do with the realities of cult heroes, even though the actual way of expressing it seems on the surface merely sexual. And then in text E of our 14, which I analyze with some of my colleagues in the dialogues in a much more detailed way, by way of close reading. But if I can give you a rough idea of what's going on here, it's obvious that the cult hero can only be understood if one is initiated into the mysteries of the cult hero. And one of the big mysteries is the resurrection of this cult hero from the dead. And in the case of Protesilaos, it turns out he has not just one resurrection, he has two. And you can see, when you think about the fact that this is a text dated to the early 3rd century CE, that to have two resurrections rather than one puts Protesilaos into a position of a rival of Jesus, who in early Christianity has, of course, one resurrection. Protesilaos, according to what we're told here in the course of this dialogue, has not one but two. And the second of the two resurrections is so mystical that our vineyard worker, the ampelurgos, doesn't even understand that mystery as well as he understands the first mystery. So he makes a disclaimer, well, I don't know all the details. I find the sentimentality and the obsession with beauty so moving, because it's obviously something that reflects the way real people felt about their cult heroes.